morning. It's Sunday, September 5. Happy Labor Day weekend. It's hard to believe that we are approaching the end of another summer. Summertime seems to go quicker than any other season of the year. And for many of us, it's our favorite time of year, which is what makes saying goodbye to another summer a little sad for some of us. Summertime is often a time of rest, slower pace of life, perhaps opportunity for us to travel and spend time with loved ones or enjoy the beauty of God's creation. All of this begins to change when September rolls around, and Labor Day is a fitting opportunity for us to think about the interplay between rest and work, and how we're at somewhat of a transitional time as work and rest relate to one another. And so it's something that I thought would be appropriate for us to think about on this Labor Day weekend. The gift of work, but primarily the gift of rest, and how we can especially experience the gift of rest as that relates to the way we enjoy a relationship with God. We all experience this oscillation between activity and rest, waking and sleeping. We experience that on a daily basis. And we as Christians have a very unique perspective on what it means to rest, to have what I might call a theology of sleep. We're going to explore a theology of sleep a little bit today. And to focus our thoughts, we're going to read and listen to a familiar psalm, Psalm 127, one of the few psalms that are ascribed to King Solomon. And we're going to hear this beautiful psalm that has a lot to teach us about who we are in a relationship with God and how He gives us incredible good blessings, including the gift of sleep. Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for He grants sleep to those He loves. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from Him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. Lots of great things there in that psalm that describe the blessings of God. Sleep is a gift of God, a blessing of God. Now, this psalm is not in any way suggesting that work is not important, that it's mere toil, that we're better off sleeping than we are working. It's simply wanting to affirm that work, as everything else, is best understood in a context, and that context being a relationship with God. God establishes boundaries in His creation, and work and rest, activity and sleeping are one of those boundaries that He has established in His creation. And so the only way we can really appreciate work and sleep is when we reflect on that in a relationship to how we relate with God, and how these are both gifts of God, very different, and yet both equally good and a source of blessing in our lives. We live at a time when work is especially seen as something that shapes our identity, gives a person value or worth. We may become far more dependent on our own capacities when it comes to the work we do or the money that we earn. And all of this needs to be contextualized in a person's relationship with God, or else, as Solomon says in these ancient words, it's all vanity. Work means nothing unless God is actively at work there. And sleep is also something that reminds us of how good and active God is in our lives. We're exploring that this morning as we think about the theology of sleep. It's more of a blessing than we might think it is. We're hearing more and more these days about how important it is for us to get a good night's sleep. The pandemic is especially something that has made sleeping difficult for many of us. Perhaps we are, especially now, experiencing worry, some kind of fear, or certainly sadness as that relates to all of the restrictions we've been living by and living with for so many months now. It's sometimes hard to get a good night's sleep when hearts are full of worry and anxiety. And yet here it is, God gives sleep to those He loves. It's also something that's very relevant in our time, the time in which we live, because with the ever-present reality of technology, we are always available to the outside world. We are always connecting virtually, technically speaking, with other people. Our phones and tablets and computers are always on, it seems, which erases the boundaries between work and sleep, between active time and downtime. We're always connected, it seems, to the outside world these days, and sleep pays the price. One study suggests that almost 30% of adults average less than 6 hours of sleep per night, and only about 30% of high school students get at least 8 hours of sleep per night. Back in 2013, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention concluded that insufficient sleep is a public health problem. Public health problem. It doesn't only affect us personally, it's a public health problem because it leads to a lot of things in society that are not necessarily good or helpful. One psychologist and sleep expert suggests that tragedies and accidents related to sleep deprivation result in at least 20,000 deaths per year in the United States. It amounts to a cost of $50 billion annually. More than 100,000 traffic accidents every year are directly related to sleep deprivation, he concludes. Every year, when we move the clock ahead and lose 1 hour of sleep, there's a spike in car accidents. And the catastrophic events that took place at Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and with the Exxon Valdez oil spill many years ago now, all of these tragedies occurred because employees were dragged down by sleep debt, he writes, and were not working at top efficiency. Workers either fell asleep on the job or were not motivated to check details closely. So sleep is important. We all know that. We experience that when we get a good night's sleep, and we experience what it means to have the unfortunate effects of not having a good night's sleep. We just don't feel ourselves. We're not operating with a fully charged battery. We might be more irritable than at other times. We know what it's like to have a good night's sleep or not. But as important as sleep is from a physical perspective, it's even more important when you analyze sleep theologically, when you have a theology of sleep and see how this fits in a spiritual connection with God. Because sleep, if nothing else, reminds us again on a daily and nightly basis of how small we are, how vulnerable we are, how limited, how helpless, how dependent we are on God for everything, His care and active work in our lives. It's what Psalm 127 is all about, how nothing really matters unless we live in a relationship with God, who actively works, even and especially when we are most vulnerable. Think about this. We spend about 1/3 of our lives sleeping, doing nothing. That means that we ought to have a theology of sleep. I mean, this amounts to about 25 years of our lives for most of us. It's a very significant part of our lifetime. Now, there are lots of things going on while we sleep. It's not as if nothing is happening. There's times of replenishment, of healing and learning where the brain is actively functioning even while we sleep. There are many benefits from sleep. And again, researchers and scientists point out all of these benefits fairly regularly. Study after study confirms that there's a lot going on when we sleep, a lot of good things. In his book, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker writes these words: "Scientists have discovered a revolutionary new way of treatment that makes you live longer. It enhances your memory and makes you more creative. It makes you look more attractive. It keeps you slim and lowers your food cravings. It prevents you from disease like cancer and dementia. It wards off colds and flu. It lowers the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and diabetes. You feel happier, less depressed, and less anxious." What is this revolutionary treatment? A good night's sleep. So lots of things are going on while we sleep, lots of good things that restore us, that prevent terrible and bad things from happening. But all of this is going on while we are completely inactive. We're not accomplishing these things. All of these good benefits of a good night's sleep are happening, but we're not doing them. They are happening in spite of us. When we sleep, we surrender to powers that are impossible for us to resist. We've all had that where we might have wanted to stay awake, but we simply couldn't. We gave in. We had to surrender because the power of sleep was simply too strong. Now, from a spiritual perspective, this is very important. It reminds us of how small we are and how great God is. How we, when we are least active, can experience something incredibly active that God is doing in our lives. Tish Warren, in her book Liturgy of the Ordinary, puts it this way: each night when we yield to sleep, we practice letting go of our reliance on self-effort and abiding in the good grace of our Creator. Embracing sleep is not only a confession of our limits, it's also a joyful confession of God's limitless care for us. For Christians, the act of relaxing into sleep is an act of reliance on God. In that place of weakness, we learn to rest in the reality that our life and death, our days and everything in them, are hidden in Christ. While we sleep, she concludes, God is at work in us, redeeming, healing, and giving grace. Those are great words, and they really connect with the overall theme of the entire Bible, that everything in our lives depends on God. It's grace, it's gift. It's not primarily about us and our capacities, our strengths, our work, our accomplishments. No, it's all a gift that God is pleased to give us. God works when we don't, when we can't. This reminds us how small we are and how great God is. And even those words in Psalm 127, the concluding words of verse 2, suggest this. Many translations, like the one I read to you, render these words as God giving sleep to those he loves. And many of those translations have a footnote indicating that there's another way of translating this challenging Hebrew verse. It's not that God just gives sleep to those he loves, but it can also be translated in this way: while we sleep, in our sleep, God is caring for those he loves. I like the contemporary English version's rendition of Psalm 127, verse 2. God takes care of his own, even while they sleep. The footnote in that version suggests that this is one possible meaning for the difficult Hebrew text. God takes care of his own, even while they sleep. Now, this is where the theology of sleep really highlights the goodness and the greatness of God, where it gets really practical for us. God works when we don't. It's the very foundation of a person's relationship with God, how everything depends on the activity of God, and how we experience life's ultimate blessing and happiness when we recognize that life is not about us primarily and all of our accomplishments and possibilities. No, we rest in the work of God. God knows all about our weakness, our vulnerability, and our inability to defeat powers that are impossible for us to resist. But he meets us there, even there, in all of our surrendering, in all of our falling, in our sleeping, and in our dying. Sleep is, as many people have suggested for centuries, a way of practicing what it will be for us one day to experience the ultimate sleep, the sleep of death. Memento Mori, the Latin words suggest that sleep is a reminder of death, and how God meets us even there when we will sleep that sleep, when we will make our bed in the grave. God meets us there, and we know this because he has come to be with us in this world and all of its brokenness and vulnerability and pain in the person of Jesus Christ, who was like us in every way, sharing every bit of our humanity. He slept. He needed to sleep as we all do, but yet so different from all of us. Because in him we see the fullness of God's power, the fullness of God in a human form. So he not only surrendered to the powers that we all face, he conquered them. He defeated them. How? By sleeping. Not the kind of sleep that he and we all experience on a daily or nightly basis, but he slept that sleep of death when he closed his eyes and made the grave his bed. At first, it seemed as though the powers of evil and sin and death conquered him, defeated him, killed him. But yet, and this is where Psalm 127 verse 2 has its ultimate application, even while he slept, Jesus slept, God was working. God was redeeming, healing, restoring, saving a fallen world. And that's what is celebrated every Lord's Day, every Sunday, as we remember that great Easter day when Jesus woke up from the sleep of death, walked out of the tomb which was his bed, and is alive again, radiant with the glory and fullness of God, spreading the life of God, the kingdom of God everywhere, a kingdom that has defeated the powers of sin and death and evil. We can rest in the finished work of God in Jesus Christ. We can sleep and rest because God has done for us things that we could never do for ourselves, and God meets us in all of our weakness and vulnerability, all of our surrendering, all of our falling, and all of our dying. He meets us there in the person of Jesus Christ, who died and rose again. I like the way Tim Keller puts it in one of his sermons. He connects the work of Christ to the primary work of God in creation. And he says that after God created everything, he said, "It is finished." And Jesus on his cross, just before he died, said those very words, "It is finished." But note the difference. When God said, "It is finished" in the beginning, he rested. When Jesus said, "It is finished," in the fullness of time, when all of the work was accomplished on the cross, "It is finished," we rest. We can rest in the work that God has done for us in the person of Jesus Christ. God meets us in our weakest with his strength. Even while we sleep, God is at work, showing how much he cares for us, the ones he loves. This is an incredible reassurance for us, perhaps especially now in these ongoing, difficult, and challenging times. I hope that you can experience a good night of sleep and rest, not only because of all of the physical benefits that gives you, but ultimately because it reminds you of who you are as a child of God, someone who can rest in the work of Christ, someone who knows that even as we sleep and we become dead to the world, as we sometimes say, we are alive in Christ and already now share the life that Christ has won for us by his dying and by his rising. It's a good thing for us to experience. Sometimes I think the holiest and most responsible thing we can do is take a nap. Give in, surrender, say no to all of the trappings of self-importance and the thoughts that suggest we really are what we make or what we do or how much we earn. Say no to all of that and say yes to a life in God, the God who even while we sleep takes care of us, the ones he loves. I hope this message is encouraging to you. I hope you can rest not only physically, but ultimately spiritually in God. Maybe this is a message that you can encourage others to watch and listen to. Share it with them if you think it may be of some help and blessing to them. We all experience the frailty of human life, surrendering, falling, losing, but God meets us there, and we can rest in knowing that. Thanks so much for watching. Be well and be blessed. I always have a few more things in there than I have time to say, usually include